and welcome to the 7th episode of Take Me Back, the interviews. I have a guest here, I should say my name. I'm Mary Kathleen Mehuron. Most people call me Kathy here in Waitsfield. And I'm here with a guest. Once again, we've been really focusing on the historic families of the Valley. And our guest today is a member of the historic Veins family. She's also quite well known in our town, or all four towns really. Here's today's newspaper. This is our local paper. We're so lucky to have a local paper, the Valley Reporter, and she's been writing for the Valley Reporter for a very long time. Her column is about town with Huguette Veins Abbott. And she was really kind to me 2 years ago when I was playing with the notion of this fundraising book. Huguette invited me to come on over, lent me a couple boxes of her stories, her published articles. And as I was writing, this is a tricky book. It's memoir, other people's stories, my stories, and a lot of photographs that many people have not seen. And from time to time, I would take Huguette's boxes out and think to myself, where would she be in that book? And every time, what I said to myself was, she needs her own book. She's so prolific a writer. This little box, now I didn't bring the big box for my dining room table because it's pouring rain outside and I didn't want anything to get damaged. But you can see these articles fit just about perfectly in this box. And it's stacked. And this is just the little one. So, welcome, Huguette. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm flattered.
I asked before we started if it was okay if I could ask her to read. I think as a fellow author, she has a very unique style, and that's why the success of her column continues, because people look forward to her vignettes that she creates. Do you mind?
No. One thing I must say, I write like I'm talking to someone. It's the only way I can do it. I don't think I could write a novel or anything like that. This is like, this is happening. This is what we do. Okay, this is about town. I did not choose the title, but that's what it's known as. And I'm from North Facein. Now, Facein is a big town with no village. It has 3 roads, South Facein, Center Facein, North Facein, and they're connected across. And their border, Route 100. You want me to read this?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is November 29th, 2012. We're getting the snow they said we could get. It's melting and as it hits the ground. The mountains will get good coating, and those who ski will be real happy. I hope everyone had a good turkey day. I know I did. Sister Nicole Mignol goes all out with 4 kinds of pie and all the fixings. There are 8 of us at the table. Young Freddie and Tiger Bear and family are all at Disney at Florida. Brother Fred was host to 7 in a big spread. It seems strange how we all travel such long distances nowadays. When we were young and growing up in Facein, going to Moortown or Waitsfield was a pretty big trip. Of course, we went to Moortown to church just about every Sunday, and until Paul Veins lived 1.5 miles further up Route 100, up on the hill, which is now Murphy Hill. Our farthest cousins were the Marbles off on Route 17 on Marble Hill. We didn't eat Sunday or holiday dinners there too often in the winter because you had to walk up most of the times in the winter. But we had many Easter feasts there. It was the same at Uncle Paul's Hill. Back then it was so steep and icy in the winter that the horses had to have extra heavy cleats on their winter shoes. Uncle Paul had to park his car halfway up the hill. I haven't heard that anyone in my family has gotten a deer this year. I haven't even seen a doe in ages. Well, the boys will have black powder season and look forward to it. I don't do black powder. It's that in between time of year when it's neither late summer nor early winter. It keeps bumping back and forth. Now that Thanksgiving is over for another year, it's time for winter to really set in. We would start keeping the cows in longer, letting them out twice a day for exercise and to drink. Cows need a lot of water to make all that milk, 20 gallons a day they have to take in. With cold weather and the cattle kept inside, we all had a lot more work to do. We always had 6 or 15 head of young stock and the bull, plus the few dry cows besides the 18 to 22 milk cows. Stalls had to be cleaned out every day and bedded down with sawdust and or hay chaff. We often had some of the young stock in an open pen under the barn. They had to be let out for water at a different time than the cows, along with the team of our horses. Each animal had to get a certain amount of grain, and depending on what age it was, it got a different kind of grain. There are many different mixtures to use. Our milk cows got 2 kinds of grain. One was called 18%, a medium grade milk maker, and I can't remember what the other one was. Horses got grain that had oats, barley, and some corn and molasses. We kids liked to take a mouthful every once in a while and chew. It tasted real good. I like to pick the sunflower seeds out of the cracked corn we fed for the chickens. It was called scratch feed. It had other kinds of seed in it too. Feeding hay started now too. No more grass. We kids had to shimmy up the side of the barn to the hay fork rope, on the hay fork rope. We'd try to get the hay thrown down before it got dark, as there was only a kerosene lantern for light until we got electricity. Mom was so glad when we got power because she was terrified of fire and always worried when we had the live flames with us. Those days are gone. Our barn is gone also, with all the others on our side of Fayston. I often wonder if the people living in North Fayston Road ever wonder what it was like living 50 or 60 years ago, how different it is now. Peace to you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Huguette. I love to talk about writing because we spend a lot of time doing it and we continually learning. I've really tried to evaluate your style. I'm a believer that, you can improve kids' English, you can have them practice writing, but I believe storytellers are born. And I think you're a storyteller that was born. It's really hard, you hear this about authors finding their voice, but truly most great storytellers have a voice. What you said, I try to write like I talk. It comes through in the writing. And I love how you weave something that's happening today, like Thanksgiving dinner. You weave it into the past. And then by the end, you come back out, and we're back in present time again. And the articles are just delightful.
Another thing, too, I found that if I write in the vernacular, the language we use then, the slang and stuff is a little different, too. When we were learning English, you wouldn't believe some of the words we learned because they told us all the dirty words. Believe it or not, people think it's funny. And then we get awful embarrassed because we'd use them not knowing what they really meant.
Now, explain to the listeners when you say when we were learning English.
Well, we're French Canadian. I was born in Canada. I was only 7 months old when we moved to Vermont, but we always spoke French until basically we were all in school. And I had us 3 oldest, and Freddie, and Armin all had to double our 2nd, 3rd grades. The boys, Armin especially, was vacant a lot of the time. He played hooky, so he missed a lot of years. But Freddie and I both had to do our 2nd grade over again.
So that would be what we call today English as a second language.
Yes.
So you had the delay because you were learning a whole new second language.
Yes. And it wasn't hard, but the thing is we often use the wrong type of words when we were learning English. It was a little different than what people talk like. not everybody's all that well educated. I lived in West Virginia for 21 years. You wouldn't believe how bad they talk. I mean, they pride themselves in ain'ts and don'ts,
Yeah.
nots. And I think when we were young, we did the same thing because that's what the adults used.
So I'm
it was-
curious now, going back to, I did know you were French Canadian. Going back, so you're a child when you come. What brought the family to Fayston?
Well, we already had some cousins, the Marbles and the Laros. The Laros, I don't know when they came, but they lived on the loop road for a while. Apparently they weren't satisfied with the farm they had there and traded even up with a farm that is on number 9 hill as you enter Fen Basin, where the road split there. Around that corner lot, back into North Fen Basin, they moved to that lot. I think the house still standing, original house.
Yeah.
But I'm not positive. So Mary Marble on Marble Hill was one of the girls raised there. Her brother, Philip Laro, the Laro farm, was her brother. And they were first double cousins to my dad and Paul Viens.
Double cousins. So we were talking about double cousins yesterday with Pat Folsom. I'm a math and science teacher, right? I taught for 40 years. And I got it in my head one day to figure out like how genetically aligned are double cousins. And double cousins are genetically as close as a half sibling. So
Well, they said that actually, I heard that they were actually closer in bloodlines than siblings. So I don't know who came up with
Yeah.
that. That's just what somebody told me. And, well, it might be, because it's two siblings marrying two siblings in another family.
So the children produced are very close
Yes.
genetically. I'm a big believer in genetics. And
Well-
just, it makes, that's why some people feel so familiar. And you can understand each other's sense of humor and all that kind of thing.
Well, we grew up with Uncle Paul's kids, the first 4 of us on both sides, almost like brothers and sisters, because we were together all the time.
Yeah.
We went to the same church. The Marbles sometimes couldn't come because they lived quite a bit further. And I can't remember when they got, there was times when nobody had cars. And then the war hit. And
Right.
you couldn't get tires, you couldn't get gas. Everything was rationed and everything. So we'd meet at the church lots of times. The mothers didn't always, because mothers, my Aunt Gertrude, my mother always seemed to have a baby to the breast for a while. So, they didn't get to go as often. But Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving were very big times, because I can't tell you how many Easter Sundays I ate Easter Sunday dinner down at the Laurel Farm. We had a funeral there not too long ago of one of the Marbles. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of reminiscing of that place and the things. And all when we were young. Of course, I'm older than they are, so they had a shorter memory, but it brought back, I almost cried a few times.
I have to ask a personal question. So when my mother-in-law, Irene Mehuron, was getting older, Mr. Marble and his wife would pick her up. And of course, I'm of the generation where I call people Mr. and Mrs. I didn't necessarily know their first name. So how are they related to you?
Janine Marble was my cousin Paul's wife.
Okay.
And she was real good friends with Irene. I remember that because they used to pick Irene up and go to the church dinner a few years ago. Anyway, Paul Marble is my second cousin, I think he's called, because it's real complicated when you get these genetics. First cousins once and twice and 3 times removed, and then you get the second cousins the same way.
Right.
So I think because he was Mary's son, that he and I are second cousins.
Well, they were awful good to my mother-in-law.
Well, I loved Irene. She was a sweet person, and she worked hard too.
She was she worked till she was 86. I used to tell Tommy, don't expect me to do that. 6 days a week.
You might not want to work that way, but there will be other things that you'll want to work at because you don't want to give it up.
Yeah.
You don't want to give your physical part up. I'm having a hard time. I'm 86 now, and some days I feel like 106 because my body is just not agreeing with what I want to do.
Yeah.
Which is very hard. And I hope I make it as long as my mother did, though her last 2 years I don't think were all that. She was existing more than anything else. And that's not quite what I want to do, but God willing, He'll let me be productive in some way.
Yeah.
And I do enjoy the seniors. We have a whole bunch of new ones that were not. I think there's only 4 or 5 of us original that when we bought the place.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That was so fun. I was asked with my friend Lee Delphos to come and speak, and it was a real fun day. It was a great experience for us.
Yeah. And you and Lee put on a nice program.
Thank you. We practiced.
So, a lot of it is you don't need to practice because what they call that ad-libbing.
Uh-huh.
That's what's really interesting sometimes, because people come out with things that you don't expect, and it opens a new page or area.
It's true. So you brought a photo book with you that I have never seen. Should we open it and start?
Well, it's up to you. There's a lot of people. My brother took up photography, the youngest one, Francis, years ago, and he even developed his own film for a long time. He even now takes his telephone camera and takes pictures and then develops them.
So I think the way to go is I will hold up the photo to my camera, because then Tony can zoom in.
Now, this is my grandmother on my mother's side. She's a center one. She's 16 there, Diana. And her last name was Marais, which is Marine, without the E. And these, I did meet these ladies here, her sisters, when they were in their 40s and 50s. And I do not remember their names because that was a long time ago when I was just a child.
What a handsome family. Oh my gosh, they're beautiful.
Well, I'm not sure how many. She had a couple of brothers too. Back then, everybody had large families. Partly to help if they were on a farm.
Right.
Like my father was one of 12. They had a huge farm. They had a milk delivery system for the village of Marieville. And then my grandfather also had a big lumber mill. So the boy, and he only had 4 boys out of 12 kids. And my grandmother, Albina, the one I'm named after, she had MS for 20 years and delivered the last 3 after she was down with it.
No kidding.
So it was a complicated, and they didn't know how to handle a lot of illnesses and everything. One of my uncles died at 21, and one of my aunts died at 16 or 17, and they never could tell me what she died of. I thought she probably had TB or something like that, but they said no, it was something else. Back then, a lot of diseases they didn't know about. You know, it just happened.
And they didn't have medications or
No,
treatments.
they didn't, and it was touch and go. That's my mother's father, Alfred.
Let's see if we can get that up here. Alfred.
And we know nothing of him. I think he was an orphan.
Okay.
But I can't tell you more than that. Her mother's father and grandfather were both sea captains on the Atlantic. And she can remember her grandfather sitting on the porch in a rocking chair, twiddling his thumbs. She said he never talked. He just rocked and twiddled his thumbs all day long. And he didn't stand the kids. The kids couldn't be making noises around him. That's all she ever told me about him. So I guess he didn't know very much on my mother's side of the family at all. But my dad, they were all in Marieville, and we went to see them over and over and over again. So I got to know intimately, pretty much, all my cousins, my first cousins.
And where is that town?
Marieville is about 35 miles east by south of Montreal, and I was born 6 miles away at Rougemont, which is about the same distance. It's apple country, there's orchards. It's also, I'm from the northern Flatlander. I'm a northern Flatlander, because you cross the border from Vermont to Canada, and it's as flat as table for a while. And then it goes to the mountains as you go towards the ocean, and then you go west in this sort of what they call the prairie, which is a prairie. And it's pretty well flat. It's rolling. So
when you took these childhood trips, how did you travel?
We always travel in a car. First, I got to take that back. When I was real little, and I don't really remember that, I know we took the train.
Okay.
Because
I wondered.
Because I was a bad little girl. I wouldn't tell Mommy when I had to go wee-wee. And I would do it. and then I'd take my pants off and leave it wherever I was.
Right.
So we're on the train, and I did that right beside the seat. Mother's nursing my brother, and she knocks the Coke bottle over because the porter's coming. This first black man I ever saw. And I screamed. I had the voice that cut glass. I'm not kidding you. When I was little, Mommy, he forgot to wash his face this morning.
What did he do?
He picked me up and laughed and hugged me all over. And even though my panties were wet, he didn't bother. He just mopped it up. Mother was so embarrassed, she said. But I know that she told me that story. And we always went on the train for a while. How we got to Waterbury, I don't know.
Well, this is what I'm wondering. In the Waitsfield Historic Society, I know you know this already, but I'm telling it to the viewers, has over 80 glass plate negatives that they restored and scanned. And one of them is of Mr. Kelty, who had a stagecoach that he would take folks from Waitsfield to the train. So I wonder if they took that. I want to believe they did, because it sounds so romantic.
Well, all I can say, it could very well have happened, because I was like 2, 3 years old.
Yeah.
You know. And I know one time we went, my 2 brothers and my sister Nicole and my sister Jeanette. Jeanette is 6 years older, 2 weeks younger than me. Mm-hmm. And we all went on a train with my mother, and my aunt met us at the station in Montreal, and then she took us a mile underground to the tunnels and everything, to the bus station. And we got on the bus and we went right to her mother's restaurant. My grandmother had a drive-in restaurant, 30 miles from Montreal and 35 miles from Joliet on Route 48. And in the summertime, it was packed. All the truckers would stop. We've got pictures in here of all the big trucks stopped in it. And they did business. They stayed open at night. They didn't even have electricity. They had gas lanterns, and they were made of brass. My uncle used to polish them. They looked like gold. They were big, old, heavy things about this high. And I used to, the reason why I know so much about it is because for a lot of summers, I went up and spent a month with them every summer. I'm the only one that ever did.
How special.
Yes, it was. And they had campground, not camping, but picnic grounds in back. It was a pine forest. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people from Montreal would come and picnic. So I had some friends that would come every Sunday or something like that, until the year there was polio.
Oh.
I was going on 9, I think it was, that fall. And I got sick. And the old doctor that came and looked at me after 3 days after they called him, and he was so overworked that he said, as far as I can tell, that's what she's got. And I was very sick. I can remember having hallucinations, hitting the wall. My aunt had to lay on me to keep me from falling out of the bed. That's how I thrashed so bad. I was all black and blue.
Because of fever?
Because of the fever. And I was sick for a whole month. And it was getting just before school was starting, because we didn't start school here until day after Labor Day, and I had about a week and a half, 2 weeks to get home. And they wouldn't have let me across the border if I hadn't been well. I would have had to stay there.
Yeah.
And I got better. I don't know how. I had all the symptoms, except I could walk and I was all right. There was one day, I remember they used to listen to the radio avidly. Montreal, 200 people died that day.
Wow.
In Boston and New York City was the same way. It was the worst epidemic they'd ever had. And why people don't want to get polio shots now is beyond me. Those shots, all kinds of shots, are necessary to keep the population alive and well.
I don't remember any other choice. When we were young, first we would all go, line up, everybody went, nobody argued with it. You did the shots, and then later they got it so you could take it in a sugar cube. It was some kind of drops.
Yeah.
But everybody took it. And that's probably why we sort of wiped it out.
Well, I was 12 years older, and they got everybody together at that old church where the apartments are, just past VG's on the same side. It was Moretown, Waitsfield, Face, and Warren. All the kids gathered there, and they had 4 doctors and 3 nurses, or 2 doctors and 4 nurses, and we got all inoculated and shot and everything. And there was 3 boys passed out because they couldn't stand the needle. They were high school boys too, on top of that.
So you think that, I bet that was some sort of traveling medical team.
They made it so that now all these shots were available, and they inoculated all the kids, school kids. They had to.
Yeah.
There wasn't any choice. And I remember because Mom and Dad, what's that one that they make a big spot? They put...
The smallpox?
Yeah, smallpox. Well, they made me have it on my thigh. And I had to pick my skirt up in front of the doctor, and I was so embarrassed. And it still showed. They said they didn't want me in the bathing suit showing off.
Right. But it's still...
But it still showed. Yeah. But it was just, I remember that so plain, and the kids crying. There was so many kids that cried. Well, they were afraid, too. They didn't know what was happening.
Well, that's it. But I don't, as I say, I don't remember a choice. The entire town went and did as they were told.
Yes, and we got better. I mean, we did typhoid and scarlet fever, and it goes on and on and on. And all these diseases and illnesses that we had when we were young. My son is the only one that had whoopee cough. Mm-hmm. That's been practically eradicated. The 2 girls didn't get it, but he did. I don't know where he got it from either.
We have pockets. We had an outbreak in the valley in, I want to say 92. Just, I think it was because there was the movement then where some parents didn't want their children to get the shots.
I know.
So there was a little pocket. But
anyway, that's the way.
So who is this beautiful lady?
This is my Aunt Lorette. Her name is Lorette, not Loretta. She died at 16 in the Loyas Palace fire. That's where 79 kids died that night. And that's where the doors opening out instead of in.
And this was Canada?
Montreal. They were born and raised in Montreal.
So, I always say, because
that's
it's my
first Holy Communion and confirmation.
That's what I wanted to know, because to me, being Irish Catholic, it almost looks like a nun. But this is her Holy Communion outfit.
Yeah. There's a picture. We had a picture of my mother, too. They did it at the same time. I don't know why they did a huge congregation, because they went to a school that had 1,500 students, all Catholic.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's really big. I'm struck by, so when we had Holy Communion, we were all in white.
I was, too.
Right? This
I lost my veil
French
when the house burnt.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, my grandmother had gotten it for me special for my first Holy Communion, and my sisters each wore it, too.
I'm sorry you lost it. Should we
Well,
turn
it was
the
getting
page?
kind of limp looking. It wasn't ratty, but it was limp. See, there's Mother.
Oh, yeah.
And this is my father's family in Marieville. And the baby is my father. And that's how we know
Wow.
MMA started having MS, because they had to carry her out to that chair. She started getting it when she was saint with him.
So how old do you think she would have been?
I haven't the vaguest idea. I don't know how old they were when they got married. He lived to be 87, I think it was.
And remind me, what was his name?
That's my grandfather, Frederick.
Your
My
grandfather
brother Fred was
Frederick.
named after him. And I can name you almost all of these people. Down here gets a little, I'm not too sure who these are. I think this is the boy that died at 21. And I don't have the vaguest idea who it is, but these here I knew.
And who are they?
This is my Aunt Maria, she's the oldest. And this is Teresa. She had 3 kids. She had 8. This is Teresa, she had 8. This is my Uncle Horace in French. He had 2 girls and 2 boys. One of them went to World War II. Came back with a lot of PTSD. This is my Uncle Paul, I think. The rest of them I don't know. And that's my father, Gregory.
I'm picturing you, so you came as a child, you had to learn English. Did you graduate from the old high school?
Oh, yes. I just celebrated 68 years.
So
2 more years, we're going to have 70, but we didn't lose any this year. We started out with 24, and we graduated 15. and there's 4 that have passed away, and one we don't know where she is. We haven't been able to find any trace of her.
So you went there from when you came to school. So that would have been first grade or second grade.
I started at North Facein and graduated 8th grade there, and we graduated at the South Facein School. That's where the ceremony was. There was Dick Brothers and Rita Vassar, and there was another person I can't remember. It was me, Janice Dunbar, and Bobby Henry in North Facein. So there were 6 of us graduated from the 8th grade year in the spring of '51.
What was it like? Did you enjoy school?
Yes and no. I had a lot of trouble with math. I still can't do my math. I learned my multiplication tables, but don't ask me now. Thank God for calculators.
Right.
I liked history. I enjoyed a lot of it, depending on the teachers we had. One year we had, I think it was 6 teachers in a row. We kept getting these new graduates. And one of them, she lasted 2 weeks. She cried the whole time. She was so homesick. And they all boarded with Mabel Henry, who was a town clerk, which is that house right where the Bowers live now. Mabel was a substitute teacher because she had been a teacher when she was not married. And she was also our janitor. Mm-hmm. And she was a town clerk for like 35 years. And our next door neighbor. Bobby almost lived with us.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was 2. He had an older brother, 12 years older than him. What else? Spelling wasn't bad. I managed, let's put it that way. When my son was having trouble, my son was right-handed, left-eyed. Mm-hmm. When the meal went by, he didn't knock his glass of milk over. So we went to a special training program when he was missed his 2nd grade. 2nd grade is tough. And he had to do that one over again. And we brought him up a whole year. And we found out when I was doing the exercise with him that I had the same problems. So we had some learning disabilities we didn't know about.
Yeah, no, but probably nobody did.
No, at that time they did not know. They didn't even know about dyslexia.
Yeah.
Thank God we didn't have that. That was bad enough. I became legal guardian of 2 kids that had dyslexia. And one was legally blind anyway. He went to school of the blind. But anyway, yes, that's my mother at 16 picking blackberries and her pearls.
Look at this beautiful woman. Oh, my God. I hope you can get that, Tony.
We've all got a picture of that framed. We've enlarged it.
It's not only that she's beautiful, the photograph is beautiful.
I know, it's a very unusual picture. But
Do you know who took it?
She's got pearls on, and she's picking blackberries in a dress.
Yeah. So she's kind of modeling.
Yeah, well, they lived in Montreal City.
Yeah.
And she had friends that went to school that lived on the islands in the St. Lawrence. And they all had farms, so she'd go and visit on weekends with them. And that's how this is, because there was no wild berry places in Montreal. So, and they had a restaurant at one time in Montreal. This is my father when he was fairly young. He'd gotten a doe. There are practically no deer in the part of Canada where they live because they've all been killed.
We might want to, because this is a very thick book, we don't have unlimited time.
No, I want to show you some
ahead?
local pictures is what I want.
Yeah, let's do that.
That's my dad when he was just before he got married or just after he got married.
As you're flipping, I'm enjoying the black and white photography.
Now this is next to our milk room, us kids.
Now this is where?
This is in Facein. The milk room isn't there anymore. It's right at the bottom of the driveway.
So this is...
That's me, Freddie, and Armand. And Armand's...
In Facein. Now we're in the United States. 3 little kids.
And his mother took that satay out and put it under the lilac bush and took our picture. And that's me when I'm 4, holding the handle. And we have a picture of my sister, Jeanette, exactly the same way, at 4 years old.
I'm curious about something. So... You know, I can picture, because of course I read your articles too, so I have a clear sense of how farm families were often really isolated. You relied on each other.
Oh gosh, yes. one thing, Dad was pretty good at mechanics. In other words, he could fix things pretty good. He worked for the town of Faison on the roads for 40 some odd years. So his equipment started slow. I don't remember when we got our oxen, but I had to have been just a year or two old by the time, because by the time we moved to Faison, I was only a year old.
Okay, so you were a baby.
Yeah, and that was I think in December of 37. And we lived in 2 rooms because the house was in bad. The barn was in better shape than the house was.
As so often happened back then.
Well, it hadn't been lived in for quite a while.
So before we go back to the photo book, you grew up, you graduated high school here, and then where did your life go?
Well, our class had got a 3-day trip down to Boston, and we did it after we graduated so that we could pick up our eels, so to speak. And as I stepped off the bus, Mother says to me, "You start at the state hospital tomorrow at 6:30. Put your things together." So I went to work for 6 months at the state hospital.
And in Waterbury?
Yes. Boy, you're never surprised at anything else you see in your life, I'll tell you. Strange things there. And that was back when they had locked wards, too.
So maybe explain to the listeners what the state hospital was all about.
Well, mostly it's about insane people, but there were a lot of people there who had been put there because families didn't know what to do with them. They were so broken up, not right. There was one little 9-year-old girl. God, was she beautiful. She had syphilis. That's why they used to test our blood, make sure we didn't have it. Her sister didn't have it, but she was born with it. And she had already, when I went to work there, already stopped talking plainly. All she did was made noises.
So the syphilis affected her brain.
Yes, what it does, it literally eats the brain.
Wow.
And she had started losing her balance, and she was very rambunctious. Oh my gosh, you almost couldn't hold her. I mean, they held her just a certain way by her hair, and it's a way we could control her at all. And there was another one.
Remind the listeners that we didn't have antibiotics then.
No, well, we had them, just started. Mm-hmm. I was 17 when I went to state hospital. When I was, well, it was after World War II, 48 I think is it. My dad got hurt really, really bad, got gangrene in his leg, and he went to see Dr. Harwood, and Dr. Harwood took one look at it, and he says, I'll meet you at the hospital. And he called the surgery, get him ready. And they had to do a huge operation on him, take all the flesh around. And he was in the hospital for a month. He received 48 shots of penicillin. The first we'd ever heard of it. It had only been used for the troops. The public were not using it until after World War II. And we were just fascinated the fact that they had this medicine that they could save somebody's life. Because he probably would have lost his leg, and it would have been really high up on his hip because it was in his higher thigh.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was things we didn't have much of or didn't know about.
So what did you do at the state hospital? What was your job?
Well, for one thing, they still had locked wards, so you carry a big ring of keys with you, and you better not let anybody else have it. I worked on Osgood 1, 2, and 3, I think is what it's called. It was one floor was all old ladies, old women, because I worked on the women's side too. I wasn't allowed on the men's side. Then there was some that had special physical and emotional problems were in another ward. And I can't remember.
So the old women, were they there because of dementia?
Most of them was dementia or misformed. Some people were just so crooked, so badly built, so all sorts of horrible physical defects. Couldn't talk. Something was wrong with their brains. They just couldn't navigate. They had to be taken care of for everything.
So
you could feed them sometimes.
Was it the case that the family simply couldn't take care of them?
I'd say probably 90% of it was, if not more, because the little girl, her family was from Ohio, And they had only come, they brought her when she was 5, and they had only come to see her 3 times.
Oh, boy.
Because it was, well, they were financially, I guess they were poor people. I don't know how they happened to come from Ohio and put her there, whether it was the only place available at the time or what.
Mm-hmm.
But, and she was such an adorable child, too. She really was. She had learned to crochet at OT, and she was in a locked cell. They had cement walls. Under the cement was this little wire like this all the way that held her. She dug that out with her fingernails. She didn't have fingernails. They were clear back here. And broke the wire in strips, and she bent it and would unravel her blanket and crochet a string. Wow. We had to take it away from her because she'd wrap it around her neck, and she could strangle herself. She just didn't know enough not to. But she had learned to do that, and she would spend hours digging that concrete away and then breaking off the wire so that she could make a hook.
And do something that she found pleasant. She had learned how to crochet.
Yeah. But
That's
I never
amazing.
heard her talk because by that time somebody said, oh, she used to talk real good, but she started to lose it now. We could see all the different phases happening to her.
How long were you at the hospital?
Just 6 months. The 23rd of June to the 23rd of December. Then I went to work in Woodstock as a mother's helper to some friends that we had met one summer. Mm-hmm. And they had moved from New York to Vermont. And then I met my husband in that next year, and I got married in 1956.
Well, tell us that story. How did you meet him?
At a square dance, around a square dance at Town Hall. It was in the January or February, I forget.
Which town hall?
It was, I don't know what the name of it was, but it was in South Woodstock.
Okay.
And some neighbors that used to have a farm right near where the people that I lived with used to farm, and they had young kids my age, and they picked me up and took me dancing. So that's how I met my.
So did you stay in South Woodstock?
Did I what?
Did you stay there?
My husband got a job as a farm manager or dairyman over in Pollitt, Vermont, and when we got married, that's where we moved.
Okay.
And then we moved.
I'm not sure where that is. How far is that from the valley?
It's right up against, it's south of here, south of Rutland, right against the New York border almost.
Okay.
Nice little town, man.
Roads being what they were, it probably took a while to get back home.
He bought he bought a van, one of those old-fashioned vans that's just, and for like $75, I think it was, and he had come to see me in Woodstock. It was a couple hours drive between Woodstock and where he worked, and he fell asleep and wrecked it.
Oh, no.
He woke up and the lights were shining up a tree, and he crawled out of it. It didn't hurt him because he got to sleep and he was limp. Otherwise, he probably could have got hurt real bad. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he walked up the hill, so we picked him up. So we got married in August of that year. And we went to ski lodges. We worked all over the place. And in March of '57, it rained hot water in Vermont. So many people went bankrupt that year because by March there was no skiing. It was all gone. There hadn't been any. Mm-hmm. And all the lodges were closing and everything, the ski tows. And we were right near Snow Mountain down near Manchester.
Yeah.
And so I called my mother and said, you're going to have to come and get us because we don't have a place. We have to move out of this lodge. We were managing this lodge. I keeping it clean. And I just got pregnant. I was sicker than a dog.
Oh, boy.
I had morning sickness for 4 months. Anyway, my dad and my brother Fred show up around 10:30. We had already gone out of the lodge and locked it so we couldn't get back in. We had a parakeet and a dog and our luggage. And my father finally shows up, and he's very quiet. Both of them are very quiet. And I'm sitting between him driving and my brother, and he says to me, he says, I got something to tell you when we get up further in a while. So we get to Rutland, and he says, your brother is in the hospital. This is Francis, the youngest one, and we don't think he's going to live.
Oh, no.
He had drank lye and water, and he was very, very sick.
My gosh.
I said, well, why didn't you tell me? He said, well, I didn't think you'd want to go. I said, well, I didn't have a choice. You know, there was no money, there was nothing.
Right.
So we come to live with my mother for a while. And Don went in the Air Force, and I had Margaret while he was there and lived with my mother. And Margaret had born in September, and in October 26, I think, is when the barn collapsed. Things got really fun. Life throws you all sorts of curves.
And it does to everybody, that no one is spared.
No, we're not. Of course, it affected me, but it didn't affect me because I wasn't the one that owned the place, and I'm not the one that did all the hard work. And my daughter knew something was going on because she wouldn't let me put her down. She screamed the whole time. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. I've said it a few times about the barn collapsing.
Let's frame this up for the listeners. When a barn collapses, it's more than a building, right?
Well, it is the fact that this had about 30 head of cattle in it, and the hay, when they dropped down into the basement, which had just been emptied, that's why it collapsed when the beams moved.
Okay.
And from the pressure of the cows on top. And 8 tons of hay fell on top of them. The loft came down too. Luckily, at the time, we still had the old crank telephones. Mm-hmm. And when my mother got on the phone, the operator says, "What's wrong, Fernand?" Because she was ringing so hard, it wasn't even ringing. She told her what happened, and we had a system. 3 short rings 3 times meant pick up the phone. There's an announcement of some kind, help, weddings, baptism, anything. And so the operator announced it. Then she called Ward Lumber Company because it was just at dusk and the men were just getting out. And my brother, Armand, his second boy, third child, was just getting out of work. And the secretary ran out and yelled to me, "Your mother's barn has collapsed. You need help." Within 20 minutes, we had 40 men up there. But it was dark, no electricity.
All of them came.
The electricity had been cut off and the barn collapsed. They parked their cars in a certain way so that the headlights beamed into the basement. And they went to it. And we only lost 1 animal.
Oh, that's a miracle.
Yes, it is. She was still breathing, but she was dying. So they went ahead and stuck her so that we could save the meat. But my mother tried to milk them, and they just wouldn't go. They wouldn't go to the neighbor's barn. They kept coming back, and she got about 3/4 of a pail of milk out of all the 20 head she had milking or so. It was terrible. And she tried farming down through because the Griffins let her have their barn, but they had to carry everything down every morning and every night, and there was no feed down there. They had transferred the feed, and I forget how many months she did it, but she finally had to quit. And she went to work at the Alpine Inn.
So they gave up their cows then?
Yeah,
Sold them?
they had to. There was no way they could keep going. It was just too hard.
And what year was that?
That was in 57.
Okay, so that was before, because, I recognize this period.
She quit in 58, actually. She went through the winter, because 57 was when October of 57 was when it collapsed.
A lot of people report early 60s they lost their animals because the change of canned milk to bulk milk.
Oh, well, that was another thing, too. We were having to... luckily, our milk room was about 60 feet away from the milking parlor and the manure pit. But all the farmers who had a milking parlor above the manure pit had to quit, because either that or build a different barn, because you could not be only so many feet from the manure pit. So there we were. And then they passed a law you had to have a bulk tank. Well, not every farmer could afford that.
Right. And that was a big investment.
So there was 2 things that happened within 2 years that put a lot of farmers out of profit. And most of them were not making, you only get paid every 2 weeks, creamery check. And you better keep your milk good and clean.
Right.
And they were changing from very rich milk to, a lot of people had Jersey herds, or a lot of Jersey. We had several Jerseys in our herd, so it was a mix, to all Holstein because they want to go less fat. That was a big phase that happened. Now we've got farmers that have nothing but Jerseys. They are nice cows, but they're hard to milk by hand, I'll tell you.
I get the cream top at Mehuron's, that milk. is so good. I mean, to me, if you're not going to have that, there's no point.
When I lived in West Virginia, we had a mini farm, and we had a old Jersey cow we bought from the people that owned the farm. And I'm not kidding you, half the gallon was cream. Of course, we give her 18%, which is the milk making, and you could give them a little bit more stuff. Well, we didn't doctor her or anything. We just fed her good, and she did very well. And I made butter and sold it.
So when the cows went, you still had other sources of growing your own food, I'm sure. Did you have chickens?
We always had a huge garden.
Yeah.
Even after everything happened, she ended up putting a garden in back. And when I moved in with her in '93, I'm the one that made a garden. I've got pictures of me in the garden. And I made some good gardens. I love gardening. And she, for a woman who was born and raised in this city, she was one hell of a farmer and a gardener.
Was she?
Yeah, she loved the animals. And she used to start her tomato and cabbage seeds town meeting day. Mm-hmm. Okay, when they got about this high, Dad would have the coal frame ready. She called it her hotbed. Yeah, it would get hot in there, I'll tell you.
Yeah. No.
And she'd plant them, and she'd sell them for $1.50 for a baker's dozen, which was $14 for her.
Yeah.
And sometimes those plants were that high and this stem's that thick.
I wonder what she charged for them.
$1.50 for 14 plants.
Oh.
And we had people come from Burlington to get them.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it was. We had a lot of friends in Barry and Montpelier would come. So she always had a huge amount, and we always put in, good Lord, at least 40 plants. It was just awful. Because we had a big garden. And they didn't know too much about it. We put a lot of cow manure in. You know, we ate organic before the idea even came around. Right. Even when we reclaimed the meadow, parts of the meadow was phosphate and lime, and the government furnished that because our soil is lacking some things in Vermont. And we have the hard pan, which is this deep or this deep, and it can be this thick, and it's just like a hard piece of metal, but it's not, it's rock. That's why you get a lot of surface water, because it goes along the top of the...
I never thought about that. That makes so much sense.
But where there's good dirt in Vermont, the soil is rich. It's nice and black. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that sometimes it's not very deep.
Right. So I glanced at the clock a few moments ago. We're getting close to the end of our episode. Should I pick, maybe just have you go through the book and pick one more cool thing to talk about?
Okay.
Whatever inspires you.
This is our oxen, Star and Dime, and I must have been real young when we got them. I can't remember, but I remember when we got the horses, King and Queen. King and Queen are Canadian-bred animals. They're half brother and sister, and those horses worked.
I've been asking other people we interviewed who grew up on farms, like, because, you know, I didn't at all. I have no experience about how you manage cows or being around horses. How did you keep yourself safe when you were a child? Because everybody started working when they were a child.
We loved our animals. When we were raising a calf, we'd go down and lay on them and love them up. And, of course, they had fleas, so we'd break the fleas, kill the fleas. So we'd powder them, too, but we had to be careful. This is us, and I've had this in the paper, on the porch. Mother was watching the floor. So these are the chairs tipped over with the rugs on. This is Jeanette, and this is Armin. And this is me. This is Nicole. And this is Freddie. We're playing train.
Playing train.
Yeah.
How do you play train?
Well, we just sit there. We turn the chairs upside down like that, and we sit in the row. We were going, and we made choo-choo sounds.
That's what I mean. Is that you hear a lot. You had to be close. These were the only friends you had most of the time, right?
Basically, the only
your
real
siblings.
close neighbor was our Bobby Henry.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to tell you, his father raised and trained oxen. So he was training these little Asher oxen, and he'd been working up the neighbors past us, which is the Boyces apparently, because there's nobody but them up there. Bobby has been playing with us constantly. I mean, go home for meals and that was it, and sleeping. So Harold Henry comes along, and Mom's at the milk room, and they stop and talk. So Harold gets ready to move, and he tells the oxen, go ahead. And Bobby comes running down, wait for me, but he says it in French. And his father says, whoa, and he stops, and he says, what did you say? So he repeated, but he repeated it in English. He says, no, that's not what you said. Oh, yes, it is. No, it's not. You said it in French. Say it again. No, I didn't do that. And we all said, yes, you did, Bobby. You know, he never could do it again.
Really?
It was so funny. We all laughed and laughed and laughed because he had been so plain and it was correct. Wait for me, I want to ride too.
Right.
You know.
But he couldn't retrieve the French again.
He could not say it again. His father says, are you sure? I didn't say that. But he had. That was so funny.
Okay, we're flipping through the photo album. We're going to pick one more good one.
These are school pictures.
Oh, let's do this one. This is a beautiful. Once again,
that's my father's. When the 50th anniversary time came around, that would have been my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. They gave a party, even though my grandma had been gone for years. And the old duffer in the middle is my grandfather, Frederick. There's my father, my Aunt Gertrude, my Aunt Germaine, my Aunt Smun, Aunt Teresa, Uncle Paul, Florence, Paul, Teresa, Florence, your grandfather, and Maria and Horace.
And where is this party taking place?
This was taken up in Marieville, Canada.
Okay, so it's up in Canada.
In Quebec.
Well, I'm going to close the book. Perhaps we can talk you into coming back sometime, and we can.
I'd be more than happy to.
Attack the rest of it.
Well, there's a lot
there. This is quite an account. And I didn't tell you, my first degree was a 2-year degree in photo engineering. And the quality of these black and white photographs, somebody really knew what they were doing.
That's Francis, most of it.
Is it Francis?
Yeah.
Wow.
All the enlargements of Francis.
Yeah.
So he's done very, very well. And there's a lot of small ones. My mother was avid. She had this nice little camera, and she used it until there was no more film made for it. It wasn't a brownie. It was a little square thing. And that took the best pictures, because we have a picture of my brother Francis, Gregory, I'll say Armand, up at Mad River when they had the first races after we had learned to ski.
Oh my gosh.
And it's snowing like just coming down, and yet you can't even see it in the camera, in the picture. He's getting ready, he's in line with getting ready to get on the chair.
Well, we will look forward to more pictures. I want to thank you, Huguette, for coming. Thanks for all your writing. And I really want to think about that book idea. If you had a fantasy about like what kind of book you would create if you could, what would it be?
I really don't know. Just stories, you know. I might explain, put the article in and say, well, this is what happened during that such thing. There's one article that I wrote about the barns that are missing now. I started at the Wilder Farm and came around like this. Did not write about the one that my uncle got killed in at the corner of North Faison, but I have a good picture of that aerial view. That is great.
Well, it's all fascinating stuff.
And there's about the time we come back from watching the movie and got stuck and walked 3 miles of snow up to your knees. Me, my dad, and my cousin. We got home about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh.
Mother was sitting up waiting for us.
All right, we're going to say goodbye. I hope you will come back.
But just ask, and if I'm able, even if I have to crawl, I might make it.
You might just. You keep on plugging away. Good to see you.
Well, never die, never quit. Really.
We will say goodbye. Episode 7, Take Me Back.